For those who are watching the recording, this is Soul Force and Social Change, Gandhi and King, a course that is being taught primarily by me, Michael Sonnleitner, who wrote his doctoral dissertation on Martin Luther King and Gandhi. And we have finished the 15-week first half of the course on Gandhi, and we are beginning, as of yesterday, to start on Martin Luther King. Today, my intention is to begin looking at Martin Luther King Jr.'s worldview in a systematic way, like we did with Gandhi. We will today focus on Martin Luther King Jr.'s assumption level, and we will once again remind ourselves of what that means, how we'll be looking at assumptions, beliefs, goals, and strategies today and for the next 3 days. And I've organized these slides in a way that will allow the participants to compare them with what we covered with Gandhi. So we'll have Gandhi's assumptions, King's assumptions, yes? And you can compare them in their worldviews from the foundation all the way up through beliefs, goals, and strategies. And that will allow us to see the similarities and the differences between these two great men in ways that most people have no idea. Most people think of King as a disciple of Gandhi or as influenced by Gandhi, and they both believe in nonviolence, and they both believe in soul force, and they both believe in social change. Well, that is superficially kind of true, but he was not much of a disciple of Gandhi. He did not understand Gandhi. My own research on King, again, as I mentioned yesterday, I've read everything Martin Luther King ever published. I've read everything that he wrote in private that is in the archives of the King Library and Center in Atlanta. I've read everything that he wrote as a graduate student and in seminary that's in Boston University, Mugar Library. I've spent many months reading, and I've also interviewed people who have known both Gandhi and King, about 30 who had known Gandhi and at least 20 who had known King very closely. And my conclusion is that King read one biography of Gandhi. He listened to one very important lecture by Lord Johnson when he was at Crozier Seminary, when Dr. Johnson, who is the president of Howard University, a Black university in Washington, D.C., he came to speak at Crozier, and Dr. Johnson had met Gandhi and was talking about Gandhi. But aside from one biography and one lecture, King did very little of any research or had very little depth of understanding of Gandhi. He was not a disciple. He did not know enough to be a disciple. And this is not a criticism. It is just a reality. Gandhi had an influence on King, but it was not so much an intellectual influence. It was more an influence of action, where, according to King, in his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, Gandhi, according to King, showed me that the Sermon on the Mount could be applied on a massive scale. He showed me that a mass movement based upon disciplined nonviolence was possible. King was inspired by, especially, the Salt Satyagraha, the nonviolent action movement of 1930-31, where over 100,000 people went to jail in India protesting against British rule. That was what impressed King. Before Gandhi, King says, I thought the Sermon on the Mount only applied to the disciples, only applied to interpersonal interactions. After Gandhi, I believe the Sermon on the Mount could be the foundation for disciplined nonviolence for a mass movement. Now, that's a very big impact of Gandhi, yes? But it's not an intellectual impact. And what King means by soul is very different than what Gandhi means by soul. They can use the same word, but mean very different things. And they do. So hopefully this will be of interest to you. And as I begin, I'll say that the next 40 minutes or so, I will focus on Martin Luther King's assumptions. And that slide will be able to be up on the screen because Harshal is such a miracle worker when it comes to electronic communication. Thank you, Harshal. This course would not happen without you. And we can proceed. Understand that I don't mind being interrupted. Please ask a question when it is in your head, because that is part of the learning process. You can count on me to come back and continue the organized presentation, but I don't mind questions when they happen. Lubna, are you unmuted? Do you want to say something?
No, I'm not muted.
That's fine. No problems. Okay, let us begin. And then if we remain a small group as we are now, then we will have probably no breakout session. We'll see if more people join. And we will have at least 15, 20 minutes at the end of our time together to have organized discussion. Okay? That's the program. All right. Well, first, let us look at King's worldview and ideology. Remember that I'm looking at assumptions, then beliefs that are built upon assumptions, goals that flow from the beliefs, and then strategies to implement the goals. Remember that a political philosophy is basically assumptions and beliefs together. A political theory is assumptions, beliefs, and goals. And a political ideology is all four: assumptions, beliefs, goals, and strategies. So that is the structure that I'm using to analyze both Gandhi and King. And when it comes to each of these levels, I will look at philosophical assumptions, economic assumptions, and political assumptions. We will separate these, even though they are all interrelated and they're not easily separated, but for analytical purposes, it allows us to then compare, for example, religious assumptions with religious beliefs, with religious goals, and so on. So we're able to have at least a two or even three-dimensional understanding of a worldview using this framework. So, the religious assumptions of Martin Luther King. Let us first say that his philosophical assumptions are Christian. His economic assumptions are liberal, and that means also capitalist. And his basic political assumptions relate to the rule of law, which is a crucial element of liberal ideology. As we go through King's worldview, we will see that he can be accurately described as a liberal Christian democratic socialist. So you can make note of that. It gives you a preview of how we will kind of conclude things 3 or 4 classes from now. But King would be accurately described as a liberal Christian / democratic socialist, with the democratic socialism coming largely into obvious presence in the last 2 or 3 years of his life. So he, like Gandhi, evolved from a reformer to very, very close to a revolutionary, if not revolutionary. He evolved from a kind of a reform liberal, as we'll discuss it, uh, kind of welfare state capitalist, and we'll talk about that, to becoming much more of a democratic socialist. So both Gandhi and King evolve, and we need to keep that in mind, because to analyze either of these people as we are seems to indicate that this is the way they always were, and that's not true. This is, I believe, the way they were at the end of their lives. If you summarize their entire worldview as they evolved, King was a Christian. His basic philosophical assumptions are Christian. Revelation is subject to reason. There are natural and moral laws. King would talk about God's law. He would talk about human law. He had read, for example, Augustine, the Christian saint and theologian in the 5th century AD. And Augustine would write, there is the city of man and the city of God. It's kind of a dualism. There are human laws and there are God's laws. And King very much accepts this Christian dualism. The Bible is reflecting of the fact that God is love. But though God is love, according to King, and clearly that is Christian, this is unusual. King did not consider the Bible to be absolutely the Word of God. It is revelation, but it is subject to reason. King questions everything. Did God create the world in 6 days and rest on the 7th? King would say that should not be taken literally. King believed in evolution. He believed in Darwin. He believed that human beings evolved from primates, perhaps about 4 million years ago. But that's not in the Bible. Well, the Bible is not complete in everything that it teaches. So King was a liberal Christian. He believed in evolution. He believed that anything that was in the Bible was written by human beings who were fallible, and that the Bible itself then is not absolutely God's word, and it is subject to reason. King was very much believing in the power of rationality. So God is love. That is the message of the Bible. And Jesus embodies the love of God. That is a fundamental assumption of King. And so he would look to the Bible for inspiration. He would look to Jesus for inspiration. He was very Christian. And yet he was open to other religious views because he's a questioning person. And he does not believe that the Bible is the only way to God. In fact, let me provoke you. Those of you who might be watching this tape, in the Mugar Library archives of Boston University, where King got his PhD, in his private papers that he wrote for his theology classes and his PhD classes, we have clearly a statement from King. I don't know if Jesus meant to found a new religion. What? What? King is not convinced that Jesus intended to create Christianity. How's that for strange? It's a very liberal view. Jesus was a person historically present in his time. He had a teaching. But from King's point of view, that teaching did not necessarily mean that he wanted to create a new religious tradition. But Dr. King, the Bible says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father but through me. Don't you believe that, King? And King would probably say something like, my father, who was a minister, believed that. My grandfather, who was a minister, believed that. But it doesn't make rational sense to me. How's that? Um, and that is because he would probably intellectually go into, well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Who am I? Well, you're Jesus, the historical person. Well, King would probably say, that is one way of looking at it. But if Jesus claimed to be the way, then it is the way that is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is embodying a way, the way of suffering love, the way of the cross. It is not about Jesus, a historical person, that brings enlightenment. It is the way. He is showing the way. And perhaps Buddha showed the way. Perhaps Muhammad showed the way in different ways. King would question whether that scripture passage that I just mentioned is exclusive, that it's only Christians that can find salvation. King did not believe that. He believed that people in any religious tradition, and perhaps even atheists, could also find enlightenment if they seek the way to truth, which is the way of love. God is love. So that is the first thing we can say about his theology. The second thing, human free will and sin exist. King does not question that. That is simply an assumption. God is omnipotent, all-powerful, but according to King, God gave human beings free will. Human beings were made in the image of God, but they are not God. And human beings have the capacity to pick and choose their own path forward. So God gave human beings free will. There is no predestination for King. You are not destined to be damned or saved. That is a different Christian sort of path, um, usually associated with John Calvin and the Puritans. Sin exists, according to King. It's not about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. That's a good story, but it is human beings have the capacity to sin because they have the capacity to choose. They can choose a more righteous path that is good or a more destructive path that is evil. I think it's very important to keep in mind that King, the liberal Christian, uh, is very dualistic. That is, there is good, there is evil. There are the laws of God, there are the laws of human beings. There is God, there is human beings. There is man, there is woman. There is black, there is white. He has very, very clear dualistic categories. In that way, he's a very binary thinker, primarily, and very unlike Gandhi. Gandhi was a very non-binary person, as we learned before, very much more of a both and, that were both violent and non-violent at the same time. That's Gandhi. That's not King. King is more theologically in his assumptions. There is either violence or there is non-violence, either or. He is thinking in dualistic categories. Keep that in mind. It's fundamental to his religious tradition, and it's fundamental to the way he is looking at the world. Maybe you will find King's thinking more in tune with your own. That's okay. We're not saying what is good and bad here necessarily. I'm a little more disposed to Gandhi, and there may be good and bad in both Gandhi and King's way of looking at things. That's my point of view. Um, Human nature is a matter of body, mind, and soul. So King definitely has a body mind dualism, and his view of soul is highly unusual. Again, his father and his grandfather, who were Baptist black ministers, would have a traditional view, Baptist view of soul as being that which God gives you. It is the source of life. It is the animating principle of life. In many ways, it is more Gandhian, even though they don't believe in reincarnation. King, the liberal Christian, broke from his father and his grandfather in saying that, well, soul is really personality. And this was an influence from his seminary days, where he read the works of Edgar Brightman, Brightman, Edgar Brightman, who had died in 1953, who was also, many years, a professor at Boston University, where King went to get his PhD. He never studied under Brightman, but Brightman's influence was very strong when King was in graduate school. Brightman was a white theologian, in this case, a Methodist, not a Baptist, who basically said that your personality is what is ultimately real about you. Your personality, how you come across. It's a combination of your emotions and your training and how the environment impacts your mind. It is your personality. And for King, personalism, the theology of Edgar Brightman, was very strong. What does that mean? Well, let us just say that theologically, it means that there is no immortal soul for King. What do you mean? Does not Jesus live on? And King, in his graduate school papers, will say, yes, Jesus lives on in us. What? If there were no Christians, Jesus would cease to exist. What? Jesus was a personality which helped show righteousness of God in this world in his time. He inspired others to follow in his footsteps, and they became Christians. For King, Jesus may not have intended to found a new religion, but he did. And Christians following in the footsteps of Jesus remember Jesus, and that is how Jesus remains alive. He is in our hearts. He is in our inspiration. What do you mean? This is surprising, isn't it? But King would say, what I mean is, if there were no Christians, Jesus would cease to exist. There is no immortal soul. We have one life to live, and it's dust to dust. And when we die, that's the end. Unless we are remembered by others. And maybe they will make a national holiday, a Martin Luther King holiday. He never thought that would happen. But then I will be remembered, and I will continue to be immortalized in the traditions of people that follow. So for King, immortality is conditioned upon whether people remember you. I think I see Momodo is shaking his head a little bit. Maybe it's just a stiff neck, but this is an unusual type of Christianity, isn't it? that Jesus has, given to King. Jesus is the inspiration to King. Jesus lives on in King. King looks to Jesus as the embodiment of love, and God is love, and we need to embody love in our life. But the soul is not immortal. The soul is your personality, according to Edgar Brightman and personalism. And your personality can be harmed. Your personality is subject to the environment. When your best friend at age 12 is taken away from you because he's a white child and his white parents don't want you to play with him because you're black, your soul can be harmed. I learned to hate white people. Remember that from yesterday? Your soul can be harmed. The evil of segregation and racial discrimination is not simply political. It's not simply economic. For King, it is personal. It harms your personality, your ability to develop as a human being to become all that you can be in this life. It is religiously evil from King's point of view. Segregation and discrimination based upon race is religiously, economically, and politically evil. And so you see the roots in his religious assumptions for that. And last but not least, in addition to Christians influencing Martin Luther King, Hegel and Marx, who he studied about in seminary as well as in graduate school, also impact King's philosophical assumptions. The dialectical idea of Hegel, the zeitgeist, the spirit of God in the age, the dominant view, Marx would call it superstructure, the ideological superstructure, the ideas that rule primarily in an age, capitalism, socialism, different ages of history. This is a dialectic where the dominant ruling class view will conflict against the oppressed, the views of the oppressed, and those clashing of views eventually will lead to a synthesis of views which will usher in a new age, the next stage of history. So I don't think Hegel was much of a Christian, and certainly Marx was not. Marx was an atheist. But King borrowed from them this idea of dialectic, primarily dialectical idealism, the clash of ideas. And he also borrowed from Marx a critique of capitalism, which apparently was very powerful for King. And so King does have, in his philosophical and religious assumptions, the idea that there are oppressors and there is an oppressed. Again, dualistic. There's oppressor and oppressed, master, slave. It's a binary way of looking at things. And both the master and the slave are, of course, harmed in their personalities by their relationship, because the master cannot fully become righteous as long as they are so dominant and oppressive. And the slave cannot become fully righteous because they are so oppressed and unable to develop the basic needs of life to sustain themselves. There is a dependency between master and slave that King condemns. And he wants to liberate them both with the love of God reflected in the embodiment of love, which is Jesus, which is to be in my spirit, guiding me to fight for justice. And true justice involves, for King, the liberation of both the master and the slave from their dependency relationship. He does not accept Marx's atheism. He does not like Marx's extreme materialism. For Marx, there is no ultimate truth at all. Everything is change for Marx. There's a dominant view of truth in an age, but there is not for all time truth. For King, there is a truth that is beyond the five senses, that is absolute, and that is revealed in the Bible, but not only to Christians. It is also revealed in the Quran for Muslims. It is revealed in the Dhammapada for Buddhists, in the Upanishads for Hindus. For King, this truth is cross-culturally revealed in different religious traditions. And we can see it if we use our minds. Rationality is very important for King. We can see it if we study it, and we can see the commonalities. Now, that is a lot to digest. We could just stop the entire session today just looking at King's religious philosophical views. We can see they're very different from Gandhi. For Gandhi, the soul is immortal, cannot be harmed. For King, the soul is your personality, and it can be harmed. Gandhi believes in reincarnation, King does not. Gandhi believes that there is kind of a dialectic between idealism and materialism, between oneness and many. But for King, there is either truth or untruth. It's a binary. So they're very different in their fundamental religious and philosophical assumptions. At this point, let us take a short break, because then you can ask some questions and I will move on to liberalism, because King was rooted in liberalism. And many of you who are from around the world, for the people watching this video, the students who have signed up for this class are over 35 people from 12 different countries. And most of you are not familiar with liberalism, so we need to spend some time with that. Mamadou, please speak if you like.
Okay. Going through your explanation about King way of ideology, like religious, came across like he one time have problem with the Catholic Church based on their corruption during his time. And also his philosophical way of life is inspired by Gandhi. Like the way I'm reading his biography. So I want to have you spend maybe 10 minutes to explain how come he have a problem with the Catholic Church based on corruption and certain area, like what you say here. He believe on truth and not truth. So I think something might connected to that.
Well, thank you. That is complex. First, I don't think that primarily he was influenced by Gandhi in his religious views. He was influenced by his Baptist church tradition in the Black southern state of Georgia. He was influenced by his father and his grandfather and his community far more than Gandhi. And when it comes to Catholicism, Protestants are Protestants and not Catholic because they split from the Catholic Church beginning in the 17th century, beginning with Martin Luther. And they did see corruption within the Catholic Church at that time. And some of the anti-Catholic bias does continue to the present time. But what Martin Luther, who was a Catholic priest, was upset about with the Catholic Church was that first, the church was not teaching the Bible in the native language of the people. So most of the Christians did not study the Bible. Martin Luther wanted them to look at the Bible itself in translation, in German or in Hindi or in whatever language that it can be translated into, so that they could learn themselves what the Bible was saying. Do not depend so much upon the priests. That was a big issue. And also there was corruption at the time in the Catholic Church, where you could give money to the church. They were called indulgences. You could buy indulgences and buy your way into salvation, buy your way into heaven by donating to the Catholic Church. And Martin Luther thought that that was also corrupt and wrong. There were many other issues that Martin Luther was upset about. For example, if a person committed suicide, they were considered to be damned to hell. Martin Luther thought that was very unloving, very unforgiving. And from Martin Luther's point of view, someone who commits suicide may still find forgiveness by an all-loving God. And they would not necessarily be condemned to hell forever. So there were issues like that. And certainly King is influenced more by Protestantism. And his father certainly was impacted by Martin Luther when he changed his name to Martin Luther. Yes. And so they were critical of the Catholic Church historically. And to the extent that the Catholic Church up into the 1960s often claimed to be the only way to salvation, even excluding Protestant Christians, they were critical of that exclusive claim. But the Catholic Church has changed from Pope John and the Second Vatican Council to the present. Intermarriage is now allowed, as is evidence between my wife and I. She is Catholic, I am not. And Martin Luther King could see liberal elements within the Catholic Church. So he was not condemning of the Catholic Church. He believed, like Jesus would say, you need to take the log out of your own eye to be able to discuss the speck in somebody else's. You need to not simply judge others, but judge others as you would want to be judged yourself. No one is perfect, according to King. Not the Catholic Church, not the Baptist Church, not Islam. No human being is perfect in their faith. So let us have some toleration for one another and learn from one another. Does that help, Mamadou?
It's okay. I understood very well. There was one going through their problems, but what you say, it is what is that, based on the corruption. And what you explain is like that. No one is perfect.
Well, corruption and very horribly sinful actions have been undertaken by Christians of most all denominations. The Catholic Church undertook the Crusades, of course, to liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Land, fighting holy wars against Muslims. Protestants have burned people at the stake, especially Puritan Protestants in Massachusetts in the early years of the United States would burn Quakers, literally burned them as heretics, because Quakers were a type of Christianity that believed in nonviolence and would not participate in war. So there are all kinds of Christians, and Christians are often not very respectful towards other Christians. Now, I don't want to be seen as simply being critical of Christians. I mean, we can see Sunni Muslims are not always respectful towards Shia Muslims, and vice versa. Iran and Iraq fought a war against one another in the 1980s that killed 1 million Muslims. Muslims killing Muslims. What would Muhammad have to say about that? He would not be pleased, I don't think. And I don't think that Jesus, who reflected the God of love, would be very happy about Christians killing other people in a just war. So most people in most religious faiths fall short of, in my view, the teachings of the prophet or the founder of their own religion. We fall short. And King would say, well, that's part of original sin. That is part of the imperfection that human beings are. We're in the image of God. We're not God. We make mistakes. We're given free will, and we make bad choices, and those bad choices create evil in the world. For King, evil, war, segregation, economic exploitation, these evils are not created by God. They're created by human beings using free will. That is God, that is King's way of looking at it. You don't have to agree, of course, but that is, I think, a fair statement of what he was saying. So he is influenced by all kinds of different Christians. He is influenced by Hegel and Marx. And he is influenced by John Locke. What? Another white guy? Well, not directly. But John Locke is credited as the founder of liberalism as an idea system. John Locke was an Englishman who lived from 1632 to 1704. John Locke wrote many books, including the second treatise on civil government in 1662. Who cares? Well, those who founded the United States, who were the colonists who created the US Constitution, were almost entirely Lockeans. They had all read the second treatise on civil government, the Declaration of Independence of 1776 in the United States, clearly was Jefferson's handiwork, and Jefferson was influenced by John Locke. The entire white cultural traditions in the United States from the founding are heavily influenced by John Locke. And even the slaves who were brought over to, of course, help build America, make America great in the first time, and did not profit from it, their slave owners were Lockean. So it is understandable that liberalism in some form is the dominant idea system of the United States, and it's understandable that that idea system is going to impact everyone here, including myself, including Martin Luther King. And so when we look at the economic and political assumptions of Martin Luther King, they are heavily influenced by John Locke. Let us look at the economic assumptions, social and political contracts. And I can see we're running short on time, but it's okay. We'll do what we can. According to Locke, there is a state of nature. Before we have society, before we have a government, we have people living in tribes and families. And they develop a social contract in a tribe. Families gather together for survival because they know that they can survive better as a group of people than they can as individuals or as families. So, according to Locke's theory, the state of nature is one of economic insecurity. Sometimes, if there is scarcity, it's a state of war where families are fighting families for scarce resources. According to Locke, you need to create tribes or small societies in order to protect yourselves from others who might be stealing what you need to survive. And tribes will gather together, according to Locke, and form a political contract to create a larger group. And according to Locke, that would include nation states. And so they are then able to better defend themselves from other large groups, perhaps called nation states. And so for Locke, the family is natural, but the tribe is created, the state is created for the sake of protecting families and individuals. And he uses contract language. The origins of liberalism go hand in hand with capitalism as an economic system. Virtually all liberals are capitalists. We'll discuss that tomorrow with beliefs. But not all capitalists are liberals, if that makes sense. And so, back to Thomas Jefferson, who was influenced by Locke and who influenced Martin Luther King. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people, all men, are created equal. Okay, that's in the Declaration of Independence, and Martin Luther King assumes that that is correct. It's foundational to his economic views. Equality. Not all men are created equal. It's all men and women, according to King. It's all people. So he updates a little bit Thomas Jefferson. And in that same document, the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson writes, and they're endowed by their Creator, by God, with inalienable rights. And among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. King also takes that to heart. These are assumptions. There are fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now you'll notice in the handout, I have pursuit of property. This is something that most people in the United States are not aware of. But Jefferson, in his first draft of the Declaration, said life, liberty, and property. Benjamin Franklin, who had read that first draft, said, hey, Thomas, I think that's a little bit harsh. Most people in the United States in 1776, in this new country, don't have property. So let's just say happiness instead, because we all know that you cannot have happiness without property. That's also very Lockean. You cannot be happy without owning property. So Thomas Jefferson revised the final draft of the Declaration, which, of course, King takes to heart, as life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But like Jefferson, and like most Americans, King would say, you need property to be happy. You need to have good wages. You need to have a house. You need to have food. You need to have property in order to be happy. Now, Locke also says that the only reason for government to exist, for that political contract to be created, for the US Constitution to be created, the only reason for the state to exist is to protect private property. And private property is defined by John Locke as your life, your liberty, and your estate. In other words, your life is your first property. You own yourself, according to Locke. And that is, by the way, a foundation for many liberals in the United States believing in the right to abortion, because a woman owns her own body, according to John Locke, and it's not for anybody else to tell her what she should do with her body. And that logically leads to the right to have an abortion if you so choose. Your life is your first property. Your liberty is your ability to mix your creative energy with paper and produce perhaps a calendar. You have to be free to produce things, according to Locke. That's the capitalism part. You must be free to mix your labor with materials like bricks and build a house. And then your house is your estate, your private property that is physical. So for Locke, your life is your first property. Liberty is only freedom to create things that you own. And the things that you own, which is your estate, which you can give to other people when you die as an inheritance, your estate is also your property. So there is this tension for King and other liberals. What is most important? Life, liberty, or estate? And more conservative liberals will say estate. What you actually own is the most important, and the government's purpose is to protect what you own. That's more Donald Trump. Someone like King would say, no, your life is your first property. The government needs to protect your life and therefore needs to provide food stamps, Social Security, health care, other things that protect your life. It's not just about what you own, Mr. Trump. It's about the social services the government must provide to help people protect their lives. And so you'll see different liberals are going to have disagreements based upon whether they prioritize life, liberty, or estate. And finally, and I guess we may have to stop with this, but still, the ideal golden rule, of course, for King is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It was the Christian ideal. But in practice, in King's own lived experience, he also saw how the golden rule is also, in practice, who has the gold rules. He sees the power of wealth and of property, estate, and he sees how that politically impacts and creates economic classes, inequality. And so you can again see how Gandhi and King are very much different. King is not a liberal. King is a liberal. Gandhi is not a liberal. Yes, as we compare them. King is fundamentally capitalist in his early life. Gandhi fundamentally is not. Gandhi doesn't even believe in private property. Your life is not your property for Gandhi. Your life is the life force. It is your soul. It is ultimately God. It is not yours personally to own. Gandhi has this trusteeship principle that we discussed. While King would say your life is your property, and it's the role of government to protect your life. There needs to be strong rule of law to be able to provide what you need as a citizen of a country to thrive as a citizen of the country. You need to be provided for the resources necessary to have food, shelter, clothing. Basic security needs need to be provided by your government. And that is part of the social and political contract. That is guaranteed under the US Constitution. And so King is very much in favor of the rule of law as a way of protecting life. But doesn't God do that? Remember, for King, God is all powerful, but God gave human beings free will. And using our free will, we make laws. Some of them are just, some of them are not. It's either or. And for King, our duty as citizens is to live in accordance with God's law of love and produce laws in our culture that protect the lives of people. Government has a strong role to play in protecting life. God is there, but God has given us the authority to create whatever government we want. That is free will. And so King is much more this worldly in many ways. And he's certainly much more liberal than Gandhi. I don't want to talk too much more, but let us open things up a little for some discussion to see if you are understanding what is being said. There are 12 of us. We still have about 15 minutes. What is your desire? Do you want to have small groups where you might all talk, or shall we stay in the group as a whole? Do you want to have two small groups to see how confused I have made you?
Maybe no need, because we are 12. That's if somebody want to discuss his ideas or whatever.
What do you think, Harshal? Should we stay together and have a discussion now, or should we have two small groups and make people feel very awkward if they don't say anything?
I think looking for all people's desire, I think we should not go with the breakout rooms.
We are small enough to stay together.
Yeah.
Okay. Then please feel free to say something if you're confused or to make an observation. Mamadou, you are unmuted. You are welcome to speak. Other people can speak.
Okay, I just want to add on to your explanation about the philosophical perception of Mr. King.
Mm-hmm.
Like what he said is true. People are made of tribe, because I can speak to my area in western part of Africa, that is where I came from, Gambia. By looking at the setup before the colonial era, we were living in tribes. So every tribe, you form your own kingdom. There you manage your economical way of political way of life and social way of life. That is how it was set up. And we were living like Mandinka kingdom, Fulak kingdom, Jola kingdom. So kingdoms like that before the invasion of the Western. So what he said is, by looking at that, during those times, although the history tells that it was very nice, there was no conflict, everybody was living peacefully compared to nowadays. Nowadays, there are universal laws, but people don't follow the laws. That's why there's always a violence all over the world.
Well, that is your experience, and
that is the observation.
And I think probably King would say it is desirable, if you can, to have a just constitution that will include everyone in the Gambia and that you all consent to, and then you can make laws that will govern all of the tribes together, and you can live in greater peace. And if the government of Gambia perhaps passes a law that discriminates or otherwise harms some tribes, you have the right to vote, you have the right to agitate, to protest, to exercise your freedom of speech, as we will see. And according to King, you can make unjust laws more just, mostly working within the system. But if the system fails, then you may have to fight outside the system to make laws more just. But for King, it is very much a matter of law. We need to have laws that govern us to protect us from one another. Because we are imperfect, we are sinful, we are disposed to be selfish, competitive individuals, and we need to have agreements amongst ourselves that will encourage us to show the love of God towards one another. For King, we need law. For Gandhi, we don't need law so much. We need simply to surrender to the Spirit of God that is within us. Gandhi assumes that human beings are fundamentally good, not fundamentally sinful. So there are some differences there between Gandhi and King. Do others want to make some observation?
Yes, sir. I think, especially keeping in mind what's going on in India, like, the political machinery has become awry, in so many ways. So I think, in such a scenario, what Gandhi said, about connecting with the soul and the inward journey, that looks more feasible. Because there's so much of, and not just in India. Look at the political machinery. Like King talks about enforcement of law. When the legislature, when the executive machinery go awry, haywire, then the last resort would be this force of the soul, to undertake that inward journey. So that way, like I think, I mean, by what's going on around the world, I feel, in today's situation, Gandhi's strategy becomes more viable way of sustaining ourselves. By
Perhaps.
connecting, the soul force becomes more dominant, just the inward journey, because everything around has gone so helter-skelter. Everything around is so chaotic. So where do we turn to? It's the inward journey that I think would sustain us and nourish us more in today's time.
Well, King would probably say, Shushitra, that is all well and good, but the environment impacts your internal spirit. The environment, if it is one of scarcity, will make you hungry. The environment, if it is one of oppression, will throw you in jail. The environment must be addressed. And so King is more of an external than internal person.
And more of an activist.
King is going to be more oriented towards changing structures and laws that are oppressing people now. And we need to change those external realities because those realities impact our personality. They impact our spirituality. They impact us. So for King, the emphasis is upon changing the external. so that internally you can be at greater peace. He's not entirely disagreeing with Gandhi, but his emphasis is far more external. We must throw off British rule. We must throw off white supremacist rule. We must stop the Ku Klux Klan terrorism that oppresses our Black communities in the South. We must do that before we can worship freely, before we can come to greater internal peace. Because now we may be living in fear of being attacked, fear of being dragged out of our homes and killed. We must act externally. King is much more of a outwardly oriented nonviolent action. And soul force is the force of one's personality as a leader to inspire other people to act, and then people moving together. He also uses the word soul to talk about whole people moving together. So soul force is a mass movement, bringing pressure upon structures to change. So soul force is one's personality. Soul force is also whole people physically moving to resist laws and to bring about change. It's not Gandhi's soul force. It's more of an externally oriented soul force. Doesn't make it good or bad. It just makes it very different.
Thank you so much for the answer.
Sure. And ultimately, as we will see more tomorrow, justice is the result. King is trying to bring about justice. And people will suffer. But unlike Gandhi, who depends upon suffering as a way of touching the heart of the opponent, King wants to minimize suffering. If we would, in the last 2 or 3 minutes we have together, see the couple of slides, Harshal, that I sent to you. Today is March 7th. In 1965, this woman, Amelia Boynton, was beaten unconscious by white police officers and state National Guards. This was in Selma, Alabama. Amelia had invited Martin Luther King to a march across a bridge. From Selma, they were going to go to Montgomery. And Amelia and others in the march were attacked by white state troopers on horseback on a bridge called the Pettus Bridge. Amelia was left for dead. So King recognized that people would suffer, but it's not like we're trying to convert others by our suffering. We must be willing to die. But for King, Gandhi simply emphasizes suffering too much. King would welcome, as we will see, police protection, but in this case, the police were attacking. The white police were attacking. This has a little something of a happier ending. This is in honor of Women's History Month, which is the month of April. Amelia was a Black woman who nearly died in the civil rights movement. As it turns out, she lived to be 110 years old. How's that? She recovered and lived incredibly long life. And 50 years after this event, she was in a wheelchair going across the Pettus Bridge on the 50th anniversary of her being beaten unconscious. And she walked across that bridge with the first president of the United States who was part Black, that is Barack Obama. So change can happen. suffering will happen, but for King, it is the love of God embodied in Jesus that we need to be inspired by, to be willing to suffer, but we don't suffer because suffering is somehow good or redemptive. We suffer because we have to. Amelia was nearly killed, but segregation was ended by the power of, for King, mass movement, soul force, physical force that brought about a change to policies in the United States. King's approach, as we will see tomorrow and the next few days, certainly emphasizes an external physical presence to confront evil as he sees it. And it is a different orientation from Gandhi, but it certainly did impact positively politics in the United States. At this point, having commemorated the attack on the Pettus Bridge and Amelia and her near-death experience of 60 years ago, I'd like us to be aware that King was and remains inspiring to many. And tomorrow we will go into King's beliefs, which are emphasized very differently than Gandhi, but still are very powerful worldview.